Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for two Facebook groups, fans of Serif software and the Affinity Designer and Photo group. I want to have a look at making your own swatch palettes. Now the swatch is found in this Swatches tab, which runs along the top of this particular box here. And you have various swatches. By default I think it starts on grey, and then you have these ones which are some from Serif when they supply the program, and some you can download and install yourself. But I want to have a look at sort of making your own palette. Now the reason why you might want a palette is that you have some set colors that you can use for your projects. Now this will pretty much work the same in Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer. The only slight problem I have had so far is with making gradient palettes, which I found to be much easier to do in Affinity Photo. I have yet to get it to work in Affinity Designer, but that's not to say it won't work. It might just be something I'm doing wrong, because I am also learning how to use both these programs as I'm going along. So I'm not going to say definitively you can't make it in Designer, the gradient palettes, but you certainly can do it in Affinity Photo. So let me just draw this square here and just show you how you'd use a swatch. So you've got your Swatch tab, and from this drop down menu I'm just going to pick colours. So you have all these ready-made colours, so you can just click on one of those colours and it will change that square to that colour. Again, you can just click around and keep changing the colour till you find one you want. If you hover the mouse over one of these squares, it will either have a name or it will have a set of numbers. Depending on how it was saved, it might be RGB numbers, it might be LAB numbers. This one is set in HSL numbers, which you can, if I come to the colors tab here, you can change from RGB to HSL or CMYK or LAB. So it depends on how the person saved these particular tabs as to what number it will have. But you can also rename them if you wanted to. You could right click on one of them, and one of the options is to rename, or you can delete. It's up to you. If you don't particularly like a color, you can just delete it, which I'm not going to do to this. So this is basically how you would use a swatch, and you don't have to just use it on a fill in a shape like this. You could use it, pick the color for the brush that you're going to be using. So it is quite a useful tool to be using. So how do you go about making your own one? Well, up here in the top right corner of this particular box there's a little icon, and if you click on that, it opens up this menu here where you can do all sorts of things like importing, exporting, creating and all that sort of thing. Now the first things I need to explain about is the difference between an application palette and a document palette. Now a document palette is linked to the document it was made with. So if I make a palette now and I link and make it a document palette, and then when I saved the particular project I was working on, it will save that sort of information within that document. So next time you open it up, it will install that palette, so you always have it there to use next time you work on your project. If it's an application palette, it will save it to the Affinity Photo or Affinity Designer program, so it can be used on every document you use in the future. I personally prefer to save mine as application palettes, because if I can't keep trying to remember where I saved a particular palette with a particular document, so that's just my personal preference. So let us create a new palette. No, it doesn't come under create, it comes under add, and I'm going to add an application palette, and that will come up as unnamed. So from the icon menu here, I'm going to rename palette, and I'm just going to call this Carl's, and then click OK. So that is now called Carl's palette. So how do I go about adding a colour into my palette? Now you can, this sort of artist palette type icon here, as you can see from the little box that has opened up once I hover over it, is add current fill to palette. As the current fill is this green, if I click on this icon, it will add green to the palette that I have open. Another way of adding a new color to a new palette, if you have I'll open up this image here. If you have an image, a photograph, or a drawing that you've done in Designer, let's say, you can select a color from it. Now, one thing you do have to be aware of, that once you've changed documents, it will go back to the grays option as it's a default. But if I come down to Carl's palette, I can now add colors from this into my palette. Now, to do this, you have this eyedropper icon up here, and I'm just going to click and hold the left mouse button and drag this magnifying glass sort of icon out, or image, and as you can see, it is selecting or showing you a magnified versions of the colors below. So I'm going to go for a sort of a grey white color. Let's try it about there. That color will now be transferred into this little square circle here, and if you click on that, it will transfer the sampled color into the fill color. So if I just click on that, it's now got that grey there, and if I click on the add current fill to palette, I now have two colors in my new palette, the green and the grey. So you could continue to add colors to your palette that way. So again, you can rename these, because these will probably have, let's say that one's an RGB settings and that one's an HSL settings. So you could rename them however you want. So now I want to show you about making a palette from the image that you have open. So if I come up to the menu icon again, and I come down to create palette from document, and as you can see, you can make an application palette or a document palette. Again, I'm going to go for application palette, and it has made a brand new palette, and it has named it the same as the image, which was tiger-860230.jpg. So that is the name it is given to that palette, and if I put the cursor over The first one, it has the same name as the palette, but it has a number 1 on the end, and the very last one has a 68 on the end. Now I've tried this on 3 or 4 different images, and it seems to always make 68 colours from an image, which is probably all well and fine in most cases, and especially on an image like this where there's really not a vast array of colours. So 68 colours palettes from that particular image is probably quite sufficient. But if you had, for example, a picture of a load of colourful flowers and what have you, 68 possible colours from that sort of image may not be sufficient, so you may want more. So you can get around this, but let me just close this down, and again I will come to the menu from this icon, and this time I'm going to create palette from image. I click on that, it will open up this new box, and I'm going to click on select image, and then all I have to do is navigate to the image that I want to use, and I will use the same tiger image. So it will open up a sample of that tiger image in this box, and by default it will make 5 palettes from that particular image. So these 5 are shown here, but you can push it up to 256, and if you click on preview it will display the 256 sampled colours from that particular image. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of colours that are very, very similar, especially in an image like this tiger one where there's not a vast array of colours to start with. We say, for example, all those very light greys there, there's probably very minimal difference between that light grey and that light grey, so they're not of much use. So 256 palette colours from that image is probably a bit excessive, but you can lower this down. Let's come down to about 100, 102. Let's click on preview. So there you have a much more manageable, varied set of colours from that particular image. So again, you can make this an application, a document, or you can save it to the currently selected palette. Well, my currently selected palette is my one, so if I'm going to pick that and then create, so it is now added those 100 and odd new colours to my green and grey that I made earlier. So again, these have now been renamed to Coles Palettes 1 up to Coles Palette 101. So this is how I can make this new palette fill up much quicker than just doing them one at a time. Right, another thing I just want to show you is that you can sort of copy and edit some of these colours. So let me say, for example, I'll click and highlight this one here, which is Coles Palette 15, and as you can see, it has changed that square to that colour. If I right click on this and click on make a copy, it will add a copy of that to the palette, but you don't necessarily want 2 of the same colour, but you can now right click on this copy of it and click on edit. Now from here you could just subtly just tinker with the sliders just to make it a very slightly different colour, maybe one that's not already in your palette. Or another thing you can do is add noise to the colour. So I'm going to push this right the way up, and then just click outside here. So I now have this palette with noise. So if I click on this one, this box will now change to that color but with noise. So you can now add a bit of texture to some of your palettes. So that is another trick that you can do in making your own palettes. You can have them sort of a flat color, or you can add a bit of texture to them. Right, moving on to making a gradient palette for your swatch. Now, like I said at the beginning, I've found this easier to do in Affinity Photo, and I struggled a bit in Affinity Designer. Now, I did try and make it what I considered to be a logical way of doing things, and the 3 or 4 times I tried it, it didn't work. But the last time I tried it, it did work. So I'm not 100% certain whether it will work again this time. It does seem to be a bit hit and miss. But then once I have done that, I will show you the workaround that I've done. But we will try this first. Let me delete this off. And I will... Let me just go back to a random color. Let's try that one. And I will just draw a box in that color, and then I will come to the gradient tool and I will change the type to linear, and I'm going to hold down the shift key and just click and drag that down to the bottom. And now I'm going to change the colors. So I'm going to come to the color tab for this one. This is the bigger circle is the currently selected color. So that one's bigger than that one. So I'm going to make that some sort of pink color. And now click and highlight the top one. I'm going to make that yellow, so it does stand out, this going yellow going to pink. I'll come back to the Swatches tab, and now I'm going to right click on this, and down to the bottom it's got add to swatches, and then from the sub menu from fill. Now I've tried, as I said, the 4 times I tried this to start with, it didn't work, and the last time I tried this, it did work. But I will click on this, and you see it didn't work that time. It has made a new palette color from the color that is selected. Let me try coming off of the gradient tool, come to the move tool, and I will right click and add to swatches from fill. And it has done it this time. It has made a yellow to pink fill. So let me get rid of that particular box and then draw another box, and it has that fill gradient ready made. And if I come back to the gradient tool, it also brings back the gradient, so you can edit it however you want after using it. So there's twice now that has worked okay, and 3 or 4 times I tried before that it didn't. So there's possibly, that means it should be able to do the same thing in Affinity Designer if it works okay. Now the way I got around this when it didn't work, this is very similar. Let me just get rid of that box. What I had to do before was to come to Layer menu and come down to New Fill Layer, and it will fill it with whatever color is set. And it's pretty much the same as what I did before. Come to the gradient tool, come to linear, pick some colors for the different Let's make yellow at the bottom this time, and I'm going to make it blue at the top, and I'm going to add a colour in the middle. Let's go with red. So then I had to come to the move tool, come back to swatches, right click on that, add to swatches from fill. So I've now got a new palette swatch that has got the gradient of 3 colours. Now, like I said, when I first tried this, I couldn't do this from the image that I already had open. I had to do it via the new fill layer, and then it worked. But it now seems to be working like it should do, so hopefully your version will work okay. If it doesn't work, then use it by going via the new fill layer option. But if I come back to the gradient tool, hang on, let me just get rid of that. Because this is a new fill layer, let me make a new document. So if I then fill this up with this gradient from the swatches, and then click on the gradient tool. Oh, it's not going to. No, that's the gradient tool. Yes, it will allow me to edit it still. So you can still edit the gradient after it's been made in the swatch palettes by coming back to the gradient tool. So that's 2 different ways of doing the same thing. If it doesn't work just by making your gradient and then right clicking on it, do the same thing but come via the new fill layer option. You maybe have no problem with it, but I have been having problems with it. So basically all you got to do then is to save this. So if you come up to your new palette, you can export the palette, and then you will need to save it somewhere. I'm going to save it to the E file, so it's just called Carl's palette, and then I'll click save. So hopefully if I now open up Designer, open a new document, right, you need to have a document open to be able to get to the Swatches tab and menu. So I'll click on the same icon that was in the photo, and then import palette as an application palette, and then go to E where I saved it, palette, open. So that palette is now available in both Affinity Designer and Affinity Photo. Now one thing you can do is, I personally do not like these very little icons for the colours. It makes it very difficult to see. So you have appearance here, so I'm going to change them to large. Now I know you do have to scroll to see the swatches, but I personally think it's easier to work with large icons. So let me just draw a square here in Designer and select this palette I made in Affinity Photo, and if I come to the gradient tool, it will allow me to edit the gradient from that particular swatch. So that is pretty much all I want to cover. I've not covered everything that is available via the swatches. You can sort, if you've named your palettes, you can sort them alphabetically or by their colours. There was some other options here which if you add a global colour and registration colours, I'm not 100% certain what they are. You need to read the help files to explain what they are. And set default for, so you can check, save it in different default options, I would assume. Like I said, this is not a be all and end all look at using swatches, but it was just a look at how to make your own swatch and transfer them between a photo and designer. Sorry if I've rambled on a bit. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.